Well, holy cow, it has been a wild ride. It has been a full 19 days since I did a podcast. Most of that is because of my grading schedule. The semester has come to a close, and this is a point in time, at least in my schedule, that the roles get reversed. Actually, I read all of the exams that my students have been writing, and interestingly enough, in a lot of cases, I get taught plenty of things. I get reminded of plenty of things. I am not satisfied. I'm gratified, which fits into the topic for today at least. But I'm gratified that the things that we have been talking about through the course of the semester, some of it has stuck, and so it's been good. A lot of long hours trying to get this done so that we can all get a rest. So anyway, you're probably wondering who I am. Probably not. You come to Psych Monologues for a variety of reasons. But I am Dr. Ray Mitsch, your host. You are joining the Psych Monologues, and just for those who are visiting, the Psych Monologues is a podcast that explores the intersection of faith, psychology, and spiritual formation, a rare combination, I might add. So pull up a chair, get comfortable, relax. Let's talk about some of the things that are facing us today. It's Christmas Eve, and there are a variety of things that assault people, whether that's the commercialism of the time or giving gifts or quote-unquote home for the holidays is not as pleasant as you thought it would be, whatever that might be. I want to take a little time to talk about, in this Christmas edition, talk about what it is we're celebrating. And hopefully it won't be some warmed-over version of what you've heard at church or anywhere else for that matter. But what we want to actually talk about is living life with others in Jesus and having that make a difference, rather than I espouse the necessary things I'm supposed to say and then I go out and live like I don't care. That was my edit for Christmas. That's your gift. You're welcome. So welcome to the Christmas edition. And I was wondering about something to talk about that everyone else hasn't talked about yet. Now, I'm sure that's in the mind of every pastor, because how many times do we need to read Luke 2, which is also in the Charlie Brown Christmas, and go back over those things? While they're important, I wanted to highlight something that connects up in maybe, I don't know if it's a different way or not, but it's something that is been playing in my mind a fair amount, and that is just thinking about God and Jesus and what makes this season so bursting with potential, so hope. It engenders a certain amount of hope in us, not hope that's built on wishful thinking, but hope that things are as perhaps God says they are. It doesn't feel that way. I realize that. Sometimes, for me at times, it's just getting through the Christmas season. It isn't really celebrating anything. Now, some might call me a Scrooge or anything, or a curmudgeon, and I'll happily accept those labels. It's not so much a matter of not liking it. There are just lots of memories attached to Christmas for people. Some of them are pleasant, some of them are not. And it isn't a matter of us trying to deny those things that will make the season any better. I think, quite honestly, accepting those things actually allows us to experience joy in a season like this that we probably wouldn't otherwise experience, partly because we're not spending all of our time resisting, avoiding, distorting, diluting, denying, like I did that, all those D's, denying what we're feeling and how we're experiencing it. But something that caught my attention and got me thinking is, one of my favorite Gospels is John. partly because it diverges from the usual synoptic gospels that are trying to portray a picture and paint a picture of Jesus' ministry. And Matthew and Luke do a masterful job at providing the context into which Jesus came. But the thing that catches my attention is how John decided to start. Because he started with the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and eventually actually lands on describing Jesus as a man full of grace and truth. And it occurred to me as I've been thinking about this, grace and truth. We love to emphasize truth, and that's a good thing. And Jesus held up the mirror, which was the most truthful thing he could have done to the people around him, specifically the Pharisees, who thought they had managed to box God up into a set of rules and regulations that allows them to know how good they are, not how good God is. But I think in some respects, the probably the most scandalous thing about Jesus may have been the fact that he was a man full of grace. Because oftentimes grace leads into grasping the truth rather than when we lead with truth and hope somebody feels grace or graciousness. So it's good for us to emphasize truth, and that's we live in the truth, right? I mean, we live in objective truth. We also live in the subjective truth, which is how we think about ourselves and others and everything else. But what about grace? And I ran across an interesting quote, and it wasn't accredited to anybody, or else I would give it. But it stood out to me in light of where we are, because we're living on a razor's edge right now. I don't know about you, but the other people around in my house, we've gotten afflicted with someone with COVID. And it feels like there's a Paul, not P-A-U-L, a person Paul, but a Paul, P-A-L-L, like sadness and grief and uncertainty and all of those things kind of hanging in the air, it would seem like. And with the new developments around COVID and all the other nonsense that's going on around us, we just say, okay, enough. I don't need to be reminded over and over again of how bad things are. And I get that. I'm not trying to emphasize that at all. But this quote caught my attention because it says, grace is most needed and best understood in the midst of sin, suffering, and brokenness. So we spend a lot of our time, it would seem to me, and this is mostly from looking back in my own journals, we spend a lot of time repackaging sin so it's not quite so nasty, or it isn't quite so convicting. Or we try to deny and diminish and minimize the suffering of being human, and not to mention the brokenness in our world and in our internal world as well. So the author continues, we live in a world of earning, deserving, and merit, and these result in judgment. That is why everyone wants and needs grace. Judgment kills. Only grace makes us alive. And that's, when you think about it, when Jesus came, he came into a world of grinding poverty. And people living on a razor's edge then, too. It wasn't because of a pandemic. It was because of a tyranny. And they were always looking to the horizon, hoping for the coming Messiah, somebody that would spell hope to them. And what came instead was a little package of grace. Because we were visited by grace, and the grace that makes us alive, that gives us a means by which to be free and an ability to grasp that we're human. We live in the midst of sin. We live in the midst of suffering. We are broken people, and we live with broken people. And grace makes it possible for us to live there with acceptance, not resignation, but acceptance. And it creates a horizon of hope. And like I said, they're not hope. I have a phrase. I know that some of my students out there have already gotten there the minute I say that, rolling their eyes. And that is that hope springs eternal in the minds of idiots and fools, because that kind of hope is wishful thinking. It's not built on hope. That which we believe in and the substance of what we know is certain. And so this kind of hope is built on grasping and embracing and accepting the reality in which we live. Now, that little baby grows up into a very, very broken world. And if you think about it, Jesus came from the perfection of being in the presence of his Father. And he comes to, this would be very much like us deciding to set up our camping trip in our campsite in the middle of a pig farm, because it would be every bit as loathsome. The smells, the pigs, all of that. And yet Jesus grew up in that culture, in that context, with grace and truth. Truth anchored him. Grace allowed him to connect. And so he went on, grew up to become a man, moved into his ministry, and it was grace that was so scandalous to the Pharisees, because he offered it to people that had already been marginalized and already been rejected, ostracized. You look through the scriptures and through the Gospels, and you see time and time again Jesus speaking to people that are marginalized people, not the least of which calling them to be disciples, not the least of which being that. And so what happens when we are visited by grace? Because I think this holiday season, as I think about it and look at it, I think that's more the deal. It's important to celebrate the birth of Christ, absolutely, and all that it means for us and all that it means in terms of Easter. But at the same time, maybe it is a relatively small stone in a pond that when thrown creates ripples. And we're told that when Jesus was born, it was the fullness of time. It was just the right time. And isn't that the way with grace? Is that it shows up when we're least looking for it, but we most need it. And that's the backdrop of what we're talking about when grace visits us, because it visits us on a regular basis. I don't think we have to go looking, actually. There are small moments throughout anyone's day that you can look, if you open your eyes widely enough, you can look and see that you have been graced. Someone has moved into your world just to make it a little bit easier. Not massively easier. They haven't given you a check for $1 million. They've just done something kind. They don't have to. It's voluntary. It's gracious. And see, I think slowly but surely, not to get into a big cultural statement, but slowly but surely, we are losing the trust in grace. And we have substituted it with controlling for what we want. And that's a pretty tough arena to operate in. Because if it's going to be about control, there will be no trust. There will be no acceptance of grace. If I'm going to get anything, I'm going to get it only because I've earned it. or I deserve it. It isn't because you have been kind and gracious enough to touch my life with that. And God gives us ultimately a model of what that looks like. He drops a little pebble into a pond of our lives with grace. And that may be the thing to look for. I mean, we emphasize and it crescendos during the holiday, right? I mean, we've got the Salvation Army folks, bell ringers out there, and we get appeals for for contributions and support and everything else for a variety of things that are all very, very worthy efforts to engage in, even vicariously by supporting them. But each one of those is an act of grace, and when we start looking at it, we see that we live in a universe that is saturated by God's grace. And that may be something to consider when you move through your day today, because Christmas Eve, people are kind of putting on the Christmas cheer and all of that goes with it. And then we get through Christmas, giving gifts and all the other things, and then we go back to the grind. The funny thing about it is that even when we get to Christmas, we give gifts because we've been given gifts. And it wouldn't even occur to us by the gifts that we give to someone else that by the end of the day, they come up and say, so how much do I owe you for the presents you gave me? We'd be scandalized and even offended. And yet we have been given the free gift of grace that allows us to restore our relationship with God, but also ultimately restore our relationships with other people and with us as well, with us. Because without some measure of grace with ourselves, whatever grace we offer other people will run out. There's no ultimate resource there, if you want to put it that way. So what I wanted to do is kind of steer clear of all of the usuals, which are, again, as I've said all along here, which are all very important, and steer into we have been visited by grace in the person of Jesus Christ. And now, what is our world going to look like? Because forgiveness is quickly moving out of our culture. It is who can get ahead and who can out-control somebody else. And that's just part of our humanity that shows up, certainly our sinfulness and brokenness that shows up in trying to kind of hedge our bets against getting hurt. And that's something that that's just a target, I think, just to put out there in front of us. It's not a usual Christmas message, if you will. I don't really do those. I think it's more of a reflection on the remarkable, lavish, overwhelming, overabundant grace that we've been given, and because we can't fit it in our heads, we settle for much, much less. And that's what Christmas ends up reminding us of again. So that's all for today. It's a little shorter than usual, but I thought I would reflect a little bit on that gift. As usual, as I mentioned before, we always have end of program reminders. We're going into a new year, and so if you have some questions you would like to see me address in an episode or two, please let me know. You can direct message me on Instagram. Subscriptions you can follow on the website and on Instagram and get the most recent updates of information coming out. Excuse me. So on Instagram is at the Psych Monologues. Facebook is ray.mitsch, Mitsch. LinkedIn is Dr. Mitsch. And if you want just the podcast itself, we're available on all the various platforms: Spotify, Stitcher, iTunes, Podbean, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music. We are in any place that you consume podcasts. And finally, if you've partnered with us in the past, thank you so much. We continue to have a need. We're going into the April retreat, looking at having 2 retreats, and so the need becomes even greater. So if you're interested in continuing that partnership or partnering with us, you can do that by going to the website at drmitch.com and click on the drop down for CCU, and you'll find the silent retreats. At the bottom, there's a donation button. You can either sign on for a monthly donation, which would be hugely helpful in terms of growing our scholarship fund that makes this available to college students to participate in this at once ancient and new way of engaging their relationship with God. All your gifts are tax deductible for the CCU silent retreats. They pass through an organization called 1615.tv, who is our fiscal sponsor. So if you would like to contribute, please make your checks out to 1615.tv and then send it to 1615.tv, P.O. Box 1777, Castle Rock, Colorado 80104. So that is it for today. I hope you have a wonderful Christmas and catch the instances of grace intersecting your life. Until next week, love ya. Later.